How's everybody doing this afternoon? Good. All right. First of all, once again, on behalf of the National Park Service, let me welcome you to Gettysburg National Military Park. My name is Ranger Karlton Smith, and I'll be with you about the next 2 hours, talking about Lieutenant Alonzo H. Cushing and his Battery A 4th U.S. Artillery, primarily here on the field on the afternoon of July 3rd. As most of you have probably read, Lieutenant Cushing himself has been authorized to receive the Medal of Honor after 151 years. So one of the things we're going to focus on is why he deserves that medal. Also, and I had to qualify that a little bit. The original announcement from the White House was that tomorrow, September 15th, Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing, Command Sergeant Major Benny Atkins from Vietnam, and Specialist Donald Sloot from Vietnam were all to receive the Medal of Honor. The latest statement from the White House is that Command Sergeant Major Atkins and Specialist Sloot will receive the Medal of Honor tomorrow. In the announcement on Lieutenant Cushing, it's basically there will be more information forthcoming. So we're not 100% sure Cushing's going to get the medal tomorrow or not. But he has been authorized by the Secretary of Defense. Congress has signed off on it. The White House has signed off on it. It's just a matter of physically giving it to somebody on Cushing's behalf. Since Cushing does not have any descendants, somebody from the U.S. Army will accept the award in his name. And since, again, because he has no descendants, but he is a graduate from West Point, the medal probably will end up at the West Point Museum. Now, his hometown of Fredonia of Delafield, Wisconsin, is petitioning to get the medal. The town of Fredonia, New York, where he grew up, is also petitioning to get the medal. And the Park Service has not officially said anything, but some people outside the park have suggested the medal should come here to Gettysburg. There had been the hope that all this would have been done in time last year for the 150th. But Congress and things being what they are, it wasn't until this past December that he finally got the vote through as part of the Defense Authorization Bill. That's how they got it.
Does anybody know why, as liberally as they gave out medals of honor during the war, he didn't get one?
Why didn't Cushing get one in the Civil War?
Yeah.
Mainly because he was killed. And back in the Civil War, they did not normally give the medal posthumously. Right. You also have to remember the time of the Civil War, the Medal of Honor was virtually the only medal the Army gave out. And so the rules for getting it back then were not as strict as what they are now. Right before World War I, the Army started to list the priority of medals and the requirements to get them. And because of that, they wrote to some people who got the medal for Civil War action, determined it didn't meet the criteria, and asked them to send the medal back. Mary Walker, the only woman who received the Medal of Honor, was told she no longer qualified and to send the medal back, and she didn't. President Truman re-awarded the medal to her. So Dr. Walker is still the only woman to receive the Medal of Honor. Pardon?
Carter.
Was it Carter? Well, somebody said Truman.
No, it's Carter.
Oh, okay. All right, so to get back to Lieutenant Alonzo Hershford Cushing. Cushing himself was born in 1841 in Delafield, Wisconsin. His father died when he was about 6 years old, and the mother moved the family to Fredonia, New York, where she had relatives. And that's where the Cushing boys and the one sister are going to grow up. There were 4 Cushing brothers altogether. Milton was served in the Civil War as a naval paymaster. Howard was served with an Indiana battery, then joined the 4th U.S., and after the Civil War, joined the 3rd U.S. Cavalry, and he'll be killed in Arizona by Apaches in 1871. Then you had Alonzo, then the younger brother, William, was served in the United States Navy. His most famous exploit was sinking the USS Albemarle. And if he had done that today, he might have qualified for the medal as well. Instead, he got the thanks of Congress and promotion to the rank of lieutenant commander. That was his reward. Unfortunately, William passes away in 1872, probably from some form of cancer. He is buried, though, at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. Alonzo is buried at West Point. So this Cushing family is the only family in American history to have a son buried at each of the 2 major military academies in the country. They actually had 2 sisters. One died very young, and the other sister did survive, married, and had four boys and 2 girls in 2 different marriages. Milton married but had no children. Howard never married. William married but had 2 daughters who never married, and that's it. Alonzo himself was never married, has no descendants. That's why the Army will accept the medal in his name whenever it's going to be given to him. Cushing graduates from West Point in June of 1861, and 1 month later, being assigned to Battery A, 4th U.S. Artillery, he's involved in the First Battle of Bull Run. After that, he's going to be assigned as an ordnance officer for General Sumner in the new 2nd Corps. He's an acting aide-de-camp to General Sumner in the Peninsula Campaign. He's an assistant topographical engineer in the Army of the Potomac. Goes back to aid General Sumner again. He'll receive the honorary rank or the brevet rank of captain for action at Fredericksburg. He receives the brevet rank of major for Chancellorsville, where he's actually in command of Battery A, 4th U.S. Artillery. And Cushing assumed command of that battery in February of 1863. He's also going to receive the brevet rank of lieutenant colonel for Gettysburg on July 1st, not July 3rd. Now, we don't know exactly what he's doing on July 1st to get that promotion. We do know that General Hancock, the new commander of the 2nd Corps, had ordered 1 section of Cushing's battery to accompany the headquarters. And we suspect Cushing is with that section. So when Hancock comes here to Gettysburg on July 1st, on the orders of General Meade, the suspicion is that Cushing is with him and probably helping to man the batteries, dispose of the batteries in some way, but enough to impress General Hancock, who's not an easy man to impress, to want to give Cushing a brevet rank of lieutenant colonel for what he did on July 1st. Sometime after that, Cushing's going to rejoin his battery on the field. What I'd like to do at this point is we're going to come up to the northern end of Cemetery Ridge. Once up there, I want to point out Woodruff's Battery. And I want to do that just to start to give you a sense of how much room a battery at regulation spacing can occupy on this field. And it might surprise you. From there, we're going to go down to the famous Tree of Knowledge. Kind of set everything up as to why Lee is making this attack, where all the troops are going to be posted. From there, we'll go down to display of limbers and caissons, talk about the organization of the battery, General Hunt's orders on the afternoon of July 3rd. Then we'll cross Hancock Avenue and go right into the guns of Cushing's Battery A, 4th U.S. Artillery. The one thing I do have to ask is I am being filmed for Facebook. And at this point, because of what's going on tomorrow, we're not quite sure when that's going to be posted. But as soon as Cushing's awarded the medal, this will be on Facebook, okay, if not before. So we are going to ask you not to stand directly in the line of the camera. And that's the only thing we have to ask you. This is also, for those who have been on other battle walks, this one is relatively easy in that we don't have any fences to climb, there's no tall grass, no brooks to cross or bridges to cross, anything like that. It's a fairly nice, smooth walk for about 500 yards down to Cushing's position. One of Cushing's artillerymen described his commander as the most able soldier, a man of excellent judgment and character. And not a few generals are describing Cushing as being brave, cool, and competent. So when he arrives here on the battlefield, he already has a fairly good reputation as a commander. The one gun immediately in front of us is a 12-pound Napoleon smoothbore. And that helps mark the position of Woodruff's battery here on July 2nd and 3rd. The Army is going to estimate that one cannon will occupy a frontage of 2 yards. Now, all these batteries are supposed to have 6 guns in them. There's supposed to be 14 yards between each gun. So when you work out the math, that means a 6-gun battery at regulation spacing occupies a frontage of 82 yards. So a big space. From the handspike that's put on the trail of the gun back to the head of the horse of the limber is 6 yards. From that limber to the next limber putting a case on is 28 yards. So from the muzzle of the gun to the back of the case on is 49 yards, which means 49 yards is just past the monument hiding behind the tree right behind us. So an 82-yard frontage and almost a 50-yard depth for one battery on the battlefield. To put that in some better perspective, the monument directly behind us over here is the monument to the 126th New York. And I usually use that as the marker for Woodruff's right gun. Now his guns being 12-pound smoothbores will have a maximum range of 1.5 miles, an effective range of maybe half that. Cushing's guns being rifled guns are going to be a longer distance. And I'll explain that once we get down to the battery. But that monument, the 126, marks the right gun of Woodruff's line. And what I'd like to do is continue down this path to where about what I think the left gun was. And that'll give you a better visual for roughly 82 yards. Now, if you look behind you, we've got the 2 guns marking the position of the 9th Mass. And find the muzzle of the gun, that'll take you down to the monument for the 126th New York. Remember, that's the right flank of Woodruff's battery line. The left flank, I think, is down near here. So there's your 82-yard frontage. Also keep in mind that Ziegler's Grove is the only large grove of trees on this part of the battlefield. And it was an open lot, almost like we have it today. The farmers would clear the underbrush out and graze their livestock back there. So nobody complains about moving through these woods. They will serve as cover concealment, but they're not a major obstacle. Also keep in mind that Cemetery Hill behind us, where the National Cemetery is today, in 1863, that was a bald hill. Almost no trees up there at all. And everything to the west of us, towards Seminary Ridge, is an open farm field. So those 3 things you want to keep in mind when we talk about the Union artillery, especially on the afternoon of July 3rd. But what we're going to do now is proceed down to the other side of Mr. Bryant's apple orchard to the famous Tree of Knowledge. Once there, I try to explain why General Lee is ordering this attack, how the Union Chief of Artillery is going to try to reply to it. Then we'll go down to display of limbers and caissons and talk about the actual nuts and bolts of Cushing's battery. To set up the events of July 3rd, it helps review the first 2 days of the battle pretty quickly. The battle is going to start on July 1st, north and west of town. The center of the town of Gettysburg is roughly 1 mile north of where we are right now. By the end of the first day, Union troops are driven back through town to a place called Cemetery Hill, where the National Cemetery is today. And that's about 400 yards north of where we are right now. On the evening of July 1st and early morning of July 2nd, the Union line would be extended to Culp's Hill. And if you look in this direction, you can see the very top of a two-story base building and a heavily wooded hill behind it. And if you have really good eyesight, right at the tree line, you can just make out the top of an observation tower. Yeah, that observation tower is on top of Culp's Hill. So that's the right flank of the Union line, roughly 3/4 of a mile from where we are right now. The line would then bend around Cemetery Hill and run down this ridge, Cemetery Ridge, about 2.5 miles south to the Round Tops. The large, more heavily wooded hill is Big Round Top. The smaller hill to the left with the bare western face is Little Round Top. General Lee's plan for July 2nd essentially was to launch an attack all along the length of the Union line. Richard Yore's Corps would demonstrate at Culp's Hill and turn that into an actual attack if the opportunity presents itself. A.P. Hill's Corps will launch attacks along Cemetery Ridge to pin down Union troops. The main attack comes at the south end of the line under the command of James Longstreet. By the end of the fighting on July 2nd, Longstreet's troops have smashed the forward Union line along Gettysburg Road at the Peach Orchard. They hold Devil's Den in front of Little Round Top. They made the wheat field a no man's land, but they failed to capture either of the two Round Tops. Over on the right, General Yore's troops have captured some of the Union breastworks on the lower slopes of Culp's Hill. And one brigade from Hill's Corps claimed to have penetrated the Union line near the U.S. Regular Monument. And the Regulars Monument is a tall obelisk just to the south of us. But by the time they got there, it was too late in the day. They had no reserves, no support. It was getting dark, a lot of bow smoke and everything, and more Union troops are coming up to plug the hole. And so that Confederate brigade retreated back across these fields to Seminary Ridge. Lee's initial plan on July 3rd was to continue with those attacks along the length of the Union line, with two exceptions. His troops will launch attacks on the His troops will launch attacks on July 3rd from the ground they gained on July 2nd. And Longstreet will have the addition of his last division, 5,500 men under the command of George Pickett. But at 4:30 in the morning of July 3rd, Union artillery along the Baltimore Pike opens fire, preparatory to the only planned Union counterattack in all 3 days of the battle. And that will force the Confederates on Culp's Hill to launch their attacks before everybody else is ready. The fight at Culp's Hill then would start to die off about 12 noon. Meanwhile, Lee is going to ride down to the south end of his line and confer with Longstreet. And he found that Longstreet, instead of getting ready to attack the Round Tops directly, was trying to issue orders to move his troops to the other side of Big Round Top and attack the position in flank, get behind it, and take it in reverse. And that's not what Lee had in mind. So now, early in the morning of July 3rd, Lee, in a sense, has to improvise a new attack. And that's when he comes up with the plan to launch 12,000 men across this mile of open field to attack the center of the Union line. Part of Lee's reasoning was that his opponent, General Meade, the man on horseback behind me, in order to reinforce the two flanks, had to pull troops from the center. So Lee believes the center is relatively weak. He also believed the Union Army was demoralized after 2 days of heavy fighting. After the battle, Lee told a staff officer he thought his men were invincible. Now, Lee is not just going to send 12,000 men across this field without some preparation. And his preparation was to launch a massive artillery assault against the Union line on Cemetery Ridge. Lee's hoping that his cannon can silence the Union guns up here, drive some of them off the ridgeline, further demoralize the infantry, so when his men come marching across the field in formation with fixed bayonets against an army they've never lost to, the Union troops up here are going to put up little, if any, resistance. To give you some idea of where all these troops are going to be posted, if you look across the field in that little notch of woods, you can see the Virginia Monument. That's going to be our marker. Pickett's division will be posted to our left or south of the Virginia Monument out in the open fields. Pettigrew and Trimble's troops are going to be to the right of the Virginia Monument and on the reverse slope of Seminary Ridge. Longstreet will establish 75 of his guns to the left of the Virginia Monument and out in the fields in front of the infantry. There'll be another 60 guns to the right of the Virginia Monument, right on the crest of Seminary Ridge. So the artillery is going to be in front, the Confederate infantry is going to be behind that. By 10 o'clock in the morning of July 3rd, Brigadier General Henry Jackson Hunt, the Chief of Artillery for the Army of the Potomac, has finished an inspection of his artillery line. And he's ordered up more ammunition to replace supplies, new equipment up here, things like that. But he's also in position to look across these fields and see the Confederates putting their artillery into position. And Hunt speculated there were a number of reasons they might be doing that. They might be trying to mass artillery to mask troop movements from one end to the other. He also thought they might be trying to mask some type of retreat, but he ultimately thought what they were really doing is setting up for some type of charge. So Hunt now will come down his line of guns, which was all the way to Little Round Top, with specific orders for the battery commanders on how to handle this incoming fire. What we're going to do at this point is continue down to a display of limbers and caissons. Once there, I'll go into more detail about how a battery is supposed to be organized, and we'll also start getting into the details of what Hunt wants his artillery to do once the Confederates start opening fire. Brigadier General Henry Jackson Hunt was the Chief of Artillery for the Army of the Potomac in the summer of 1863. And Hunt felt that meant he was in command of all 330 cannon in the Army of the Potomac, not counting the 50 guns that were assigned to the Cavalry Corps, which he felt he couldn't effectively control. 216 of those guns are assigned to the Infantry Corps, organized into 47 batteries. 114 are assigned to the Artillery Reserve and organized into 21 batteries altogether. In the Army of the Potomac by the summer of 1863, every battery was to consist of at least 6 guns, all the same type and caliber. Every gun is going to be pulled up to the front line by something called a limber. And a limber is just a two-wheeled vehicle designed to pull something and carry an ammunition chest. So you've got the gun and the limber up front. Behind that is going to be another limber with an ammunition chest, this one pulling a caisson. And a caisson is just another two-wheeled vehicle designed to carry 2 extra ammunition chests and a spare wheel on the back. And then following the line of limbers and caissons will be a battery wagon carrying extra supplies for the battery. Rammers, sponges, friction primers, horseshoes, nails, jacks, things like that. And also assigned to each battery will be a portable forge. So each battery can make minor repairs on the field. And ideally in a 6-gun battery like this, you would have 5 officers, a captain and 4 lieutenants. There would be 2 staff sergeants, a first sergeant and a quartermaster sergeant. 6 sergeants who are chiefs of the pieces. So you have 1 sergeant in charge of each gun. There'll be 12 corporals, 6 of whom are designated as gunners, and the other 6 are back with the caissons. You have 6 artificers, which basically means those are the fix-it guys. Anything breaks down, they're the ones repairing it. So you have 1 artificer again for each gun, but each gun section, which means he's responsible for the gun, the limbers, and the caissons, to repair them and keep them in working order. There will be 2 buglers for each battery, 52 drivers, and 70 cannoneers. So by the time you work it all down, there's 5 officers, 150 enlisted men, and 110 horses to pull all this equipment up to the front line. So keep that in mind. 1 battery has 110 horses. When you start to add up all the batteries on both sides, the supply wagons, the cavalry, the horses for the officers, and everything else, both armies arrive on the field with something close to 70,000 horses. Yeah, I can't imagine 70,000 horses in one place. That also means that 1 horse can consume up to 10 gallons of water a day. So 700,000 gallons of water a day just for the horses. And also 1 horse can leave behind 10 pounds of manure a day. So close to 1.5 tons manure on this field after 3 days in that hot July weather. So when people talk about the smells of the battle, it's not just the 8,000 dead soldiers, the 3,000 dead horses, it's what the horses left behind. And the smell doesn't dissipate for almost a month after the battle. It's so bad people are in town in the middle of July, in the days before air conditioning, are closing the windows at night. If you can imagine trying to do that. But General Hunt, when he sees the deployment of the Confederate artillery, comes down the line with specific orders for the battery commanders. And I had to back up once, because the Union Army 2nd Corps here, along this part of the line, will have 5 batteries assigned to it. Woodruff's battery in Ziegler's Grove, Arnold's battery to the right front, Cushing's battery right across the road, and on the other side of this little copse of trees will be Brown and Wardy's batteries. 5 batteries that by the morning of July 3rd total 28 guns. And General Hunt's orders for all those batteries all along the line, from Cemetery Hill down to Little Round Top, is for the battery commanders to wait at least 15 minutes after the Confederates start shooting before they answer back. Hunt then wants each battery commander to focus in on 1 battery at a time, knock it out, and then move on to another one. General Hunt later wrote he wanted his cannoneers to make target practice of their return fire. He probably also reminded his cannoneers as to his standing orders concerning the rate of fire. According to Hunt's orders, only if the distance, range, and formation render shots highly effective, then his guns could fire 1 round every 2 minutes. If it's not that effective, they could fire 1 round every 4 to 6 minutes. If they don't have a good target, they're not supposed to be shooting at all. Hunt was not a big advocate of, let's say, an artillery officer along Cemetery Ridge looking over towards what's now the Virginia Monument and seeing a dozen horsemen over there, maybe indicating a general and his staff, and that artillery officer trying to fire shells over there to knock them out. Hunt thought that was a waste of ammunition. He also was not a big advocate of counter battery fire. Hunt felt that's a waste of ammunition. What he wants his batteries to do is save the bulk of their ammunition for the enemy infantry. That's when he felt the fire would be most effective. Civil War surgeons back at field hospitals at this time generally reported that out of every 100 wounded they saw, only maybe 3 were wounded by swords, bayonets, or artillery fire. So some modern historians have concluded that Civil War artillery must not have been that effective. But one of the counter arguments is if you're hit by a 12-pound solid shot, you're not going back to the hospital. Also, General Hunt felt the main importance of artillery was not necessarily physical damage, it was how you affect the morale of the advancing infantry. So if your artillery can get the enemy to stop and not come forward, then they've done their job. We know, for example, during Pickett's charge, there are individual soldiers who will stop and not come forward, or take the opportunity against orders to take a wounded comrade back to the rear. Now, how many are doing that, we don't know, and there's no way to tell. Because the way I explain it to people, I don't mean to be facetious or anything like that, but if you survive Pickett's charge, and 40 years later your grandson asks your granddad, were you in Pickett's charge? You're not going to stand there and tell him, yes, but I stopped halfway across the field. You're going to tell your grandson, you made it all the way up here and back safely. So again, we don't know how many may have stopped and not come forward. But that's what Hunt felt was the most value of artillery to affect the morale of the infantry. What we're going to do is cross Hancock Avenue and go right into the guns of Cushing's Battery A and start talking about the artillery of the battery itself and Lieutenant Cushing on the battlefield on the 2nd, and especially on July 3rd. Captain John Hazard is in command of the 2nd Corps Artillery Battalion, and he's going to report that on the morning of July 1st, the brigade moved from Uniontown, Maryland to Taneytown, where a halt of 3 hours was made. At 2 p.m., the brigade moved towards Gettysburg, and at 11 p.m. went into position 3 miles southeast of Gettysburg on the Taneytown Road and facing Gettysburg. So the Union Army 2nd Corps is moving up the Taneytown Road right behind us. And they stopped for the night down behind Big Round Top. That's where we're going to go into bivouac. And then the brigade moved early in the morning at daylight toward Gettysburg to the left of the Taneytown Road. So right in this position on Cemetery Ridge is where the 2nd Corps starts to move into position. And the batteries start to be distributed along the line. And by that time, apparently, Cushing and those 2 missing sections have rejoined the battery. Now, I said that the regulation space in the batteries would take up a frontage of 82 yards. But Cushing's right gun is going to be near that stone wall to the north of us. And to the south, you have the clump of trees, which was a little bigger back then than it is today. And this is not 82 yards. So Cushing's battery might be at half distance. So maybe only 7 yards between the guns. And the guns probably were not what we have in display today. From my research, the guns I think were back closer to the Hancock Avenue and probably more in line with Arnold's guns to our left rear, which means his limbers and caissons would be on the reverse slope of Cemetery Ridge, making them a little bit more safer, gives them some more cover back there. The 69th Pennsylvania, in front of the copse of trees, had to create a slashing so Cushing's guns would have a field of fire in that direction. So they had to manufacture the battlefield in a way to suit the troops and Cushing's battery. At 11 o'clock in the morning of July 2nd, Confederate troops were seen in the woods across the way from us. And sometime in the afternoon, there is going to be a little counter battery fire. But the combined weight of Arnold's battalion was silenced the Confederates. Longstreet's attack on July 2nd would start at 4 o'clock in the morning, starting at the south end of the field towards the Round Tops. Eventually, the attack starts to sweep up along the length of the Emmitsburg Road in front of us. And by 6:30, 7 o'clock, Confederate troops have advanced up to and just past the Cadore Farm buildings to your left front. One report is that Cushing turned 3 guns in that direction and fired canister at short range. It was only 300 yards. The only problem I have with that report is that means Cushing's firing canister over the heads of the 69th Pennsylvania. So I think what Cushing is actually doing is firing something called case shot. That's going to help stop the Confederates and drive them back. Now, Cushing's battery is armed with 6 3-inch ordnance rifles, and these can have a maximum range of 2.5 miles, an effective range of maybe half that. Keep in mind, in the Civil War, there's no indirect fire control, so each individual gunner has to see their target in order to hit it. So half of that 2.5 miles is probably the effective range. And of course, once you start to fire, you get a lot of smoke out here, and it makes it even tougher to see your target. One Union gunner down at the Peach Orchard on July 2nd, every time he fired his gun, he would drop to the ground. His commander thought it was an act of cowardice, and then he realized what the guy was trying to do was get below the level of the smoke, try to see where his shot went. Now, how he's going to see where his shot goes in all that confusion, I don't know. But at least that's what he was trying to do. Cushing's battery, like most of the guns here on the field, can fire 4 types of ammunition. They can fire something called solid shot, which is just what it sounds like. It would be a solid piece of iron, normally used in the open field to try to dismount a cannon, a limber, knock holes in a building, something like that. You normally don't use solid shot against an advancing line of infantry, because that infantry is coming at you in 2 lines or 2 ranks. So if you fired into that, you might knock out 2 guys, and that's it. But if you can fire down the line, then you can use solid shot. One Confederate officer doing Pickett's charge said after they crossed the Emmitsburg Road directly in front of us, they got hit in the right flank by a piece of solid shot. And he claimed that one shot took out a dozen men and cut one of them completely in half, probably the first guy it hit. They can also fire shell, which is like solid shot, only it's hollow on the inside. And that hollow spot is going to be filled with black powder. That shell then is designed to explode over the heads of enemy soldiers and come apart into 7 or 8 jagged pieces about that big. They can also fire case shot, which is like shell, only instead of the hollow spot being filled with just black powder, it's also filled with metal pellets. And that's designed to explode 50 to 75 yards in front of a moving line of troops and roughly 10 yards in the air. The reason for firing short is that means the enemy is moving into your line of fire. And that's more psychologically damaging than the case starts blowing up behind the line. The last type of ammunition these guns could fire is something called canister. Canister is nothing more than a tin can filled with 32 iron pellets. The tin can is designed to disintegrate when the cannon is fired. So you try and turn your cannon into a giant shotgun. Now, in a smoothbore cannon like Woodruff has, you do get that shotgun effect. With a rifled gun, the canister tends to stay in a more tight formation. So it doesn't quite get the spread a smoothbore does. And if infantry had a choice, they'd rather take a battery of rifled guns than a battery of smoothbores, because they know the difference in the shot and the effect of the canister. But just to give you, and that's for ranges of under 600 yards. If the enemy gets to within 300 yards, the cannoneers could start to fire double and triple charges of canister. That means 2 or 3 of those 10 cans shoved into the muzzle of one gun and all fired at the same time. At one point, Woodruff's battery in Ziegler's Grove was firing double rounds of canister from every cannon every minute. And that's roughly 324 golf ball sized balls going down range every minute. We talked about Cushing's battery on July 2nd, and the battery itself, Cushing, the 5 officers, or excuse me, the 4 officers normally assigned to the battery, Cushing's the only one here. The other 3 on detached duty. He does receive the services of Lieutenant Samuel Canby from another battery in the 4th Artillery, but he hasn't officially joined until the beginning of June. He also gets the services of Lieutenant Joseph Milne from Brown's Rhode Island Battery, but he also doesn't come in until the beginning of June. So the 2 substitute officers have only been with the battery for a little more than a month, and that's it. But keep in mind, this is a battery in the United States Regular Army. And it's been around, it's got a long history back to 1821. And some of the enlisted men, like Sergeant Frederick Fuger, had been with the battery for almost 10 years. So these are enlisted men who know their jobs, know what's expected of them. Cushing's muster report, his June 30th muster report listed 146 men attached to the battery. Of that number, 1 was on detached duty, 8 were on sick leave, and 3 deserted right before the battle. So it took him down to 134. But he is going to get 4 guys from the Ordnance Department, 3 from the 19th Maine, and 8 volunteers from the 1st Minnesota, who, since Chancellorsville, will come in to help fill out the battery ranks. So Cushing has 143 men out of the 150 he needs. So he's in pretty good shape. He doesn't have 110 horses though. He has 115. Now I don't know if that includes the horses for the officers, but that's what they put in the official report. So he probably had 5 more horses than regulations called for. So his battery's in pretty good shape coming here to the field. There is one report, and it seems a little strange at first. It's actually coming from the history of Arnold's battery beside us. And that is on the evening of July 2nd, after the fighting here has died off. And this dies off around 7:30 with the sunset. They now start to hear firing in the rear. It's the fighting breaking out at Culp's Hill. From this perspective, Culp's Hill is in the rear of this line. And this one report is going to state that Cushing's battery was turned to face towards the rear. It seems a little strange, but it does make sense. If there's fighting in your rear, you've got no idea what's going on. And suddenly the Confederates could break through and attack this position from the rear. So that may be why you have this report of Cushing reversing his guns and facing to the rear. By the morning of July 3rd, though, they're facing back across the ridge. And at 8 o'clock in the morning of July 3rd, Cushing's battery comes under counter-battery fire. At that point, the Confederates succeeded in hitting and blowing up Cushing's number 2 limber chest. That explosion set off limbers 1 and 3 on either side of it. But despite that explosion of close to 150 rounds of ammunition, nobody in the battery was reported killed or seriously injured. The worst thing apparently that happened was the tails of the wheel horses were singed. And that's about it. Although those horses did start to head for the front, and they had to be stopped to put back. But Cushing now in the mornings lost 3 limber chests. And I'm not sure if he had time to replace them or not. If he did, they're bringing the limbers up from the caissons. And that's it. So that's where they're coming from. The main bombardment is going to start here at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Roughly 140 Confederate cannon are going to start to open fire. One member of Cushing's battery remembered, actually a guy from the 69th Pennsylvania, remembered that right before the cannonade started, Cushing's battery was handing out hardtack to the battery members. So this guy from the 69th came over with some type of old hat and got a hat full of hardtack to take back to his guys. He said he no sooner got back there, though, when the cannonade started to open. A member of Cushing's battery remembered how beautiful it looked a few minutes before the awful cannonade opened. But within 15 minutes after it began, the whole landscape was enveloped in such a cloud of smoke that nothing could be seen. So within 15 minutes, there's so much smoke out here, you can't see anything. Eventually, the only targets anybody's going to have are the flashes through the smoke when the guns go off. And that's it. But following General Hunt's orders, the Union batteries wait at least 15 minutes before they answer back. Also within those first 15 minutes, though, one of Cushing's guns is hit and dismounted. The gun crew started to hit for the rear. Cushing stopped them, pulled out his pistol, ordered him back to duty, and threatened to shoot the next man who left his duty station. The sergeant and probably the corporal went back to the line of caissons, got an extra wheel and probably a jack, brought them up here, jacked up the gun, got the old wheel off, the new wheel on, and got the gun working again. Also, General Gibbon, coming up from the rear, said he saw another shell come over the ridge underneath one of the limbers and strike an artilleryman standing behind it. And then he saw that guy going back, hopping back to the rear on his one good leg with the shreds of the other leg dangling below him. So that's going on here.
How many Union guns then would be defending?
Are going to be defending the ridge.
Yeah.
The cemetery ridge itself, counting the 5 batteries up here, initially are 28 guns.
And then from the side,
And then McGilvery's artillery line below the Pennsylvania Monument is 32. And you have close to 40 guns on Cemetery Hill. And then in the course of the engagement, Hunt's going to order up more batteries to the ridge line.
so it's over 100 total.
Hunt estimated 88 altogether. Now, depends on who you count, when they're here, and all that. Some of the batteries, like the 9th Massachusetts Battery, doesn't arrive on the field until after everything's over. So you can't count those 2 guns. Kind of lost my train of thought. The noon temperature on July 3rd was 87 degrees. We think, though, that was 87 degrees in the shade. So with the humidity out here, the real feel was probably around 94, 95 degrees. And it was humid that day because they had a thunderstorm that night. Now, one officer with McGilvery's battery is going to report that viewed as a display of fireworks, the rebel practice was entirely successful. But as a military demonstration, it was the biggest humbug of the season. Now, that guy's on the edge of the cannonade, so it's not really affecting him. From the Pennsylvania Monument up to Ziegler's Grove, the troops up here have a different perspective. General Gibbon himself is going to report the artillerymen were all busily at work at their guns. Overall hung a heavy pall of smoke, underneath which could be seen the rapidly moving legs of the men as they rushed to and fro between the pieces and the line of limbers, carrying forward the ammunition. Gibbon also said that looking at Cushing's battery, my eyes happened to rest upon one of the gunners standing in the rear, and that's the one that has his leg shot off, standing by the limbers. One Union infantry officer with the 111th New York, up near the Bryan barn, said he could think of a 4-letter word to describe the scene, but he said it was a word normally heard only in church or in the army. He did say he thought it was hotter here on the afternoon of July 3rd than the valley of the Jordan River. Not, he said, to make any warmer comparison than that. And Gibbon's aide, Lieutenant Hassler, is going to report, our artillerymen upon the crest budged not an inch, nor intermitted. But though cannon and limber were smashed, and guns dismounted, and men and horses killed, there was amidst smoke and sweat they gave back without grudge or loss of time in the sending in kind whatever the enemy sent. One officer in the 12th New Jersey reported the heat of the July sun, the effect of the smoke from the bursting shells and from our own artillery upon the eyes and lungs, even those who escaped the greatest ills of wounds, was an experience which no one who was in that line will ever forget. Lieutenant Haskell also described the guns up here as the guardian lions of the crest. He also said these guns are great infuriate demons, not of this earth, whose mouths blaze with smoky tongues of living fire, and whose murky breath, sulfur-laden, rose around them along the ground, the smoke of Hades. One of the main ingredients in black powder is sulfur. And so that smell now is getting into everything. So the description of the guns being great infuriate demons, one guy saying they were hotter than the afternoon, hotter here than the valley of Jordan River. You kind of start to get the impression of where these guys thought they were on the afternoon of July 3rd. I also think all the smoke out here is creating something of a greenhouse effect and trapping most of the heat and humidity right close to the ground. The Confederates themselves thought this bombardment would only take about 15 or 20 minutes. After close to an hour, General Hunt began to realize that his return fire was ineffective, that his guns were not knocking out the Confederate guns. Now, what Hunt can't see because of the smoke is when his guns overshoot the Confederate artillery, the shells are falling among the Confederate infantry getting ready to make the attack. So the infantry is taking casualties before the attack even starts, but Hunt can't see that. So he sends an order down the lines for his cannons to slowly cease fire. Again, he wants his cannoneers to save the long-range ammunition for the infantry. Hunt also believed that by stopping his fire, he would actually bait the Confederates into launching the assault, which General Hunt always believed he could stop just with the use of his artillery. And he later wrote that he thought his artillery could have stopped the attack before he even got to the Emmitsburg Road. That's how convinced he was of his artillery. But now he runs into the commander of the 2nd Corps, Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, who, for his own reasons, wants the guns to keep firing. So now place yourself in the position of First Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing, 2 years out of West Point. He's got two conflicting orders. So which one do you obey? There's two routes he can take. Hancock is a major general, where Hunt is only a brigadier. So Hancock outranks Hunt. There's also a general understanding in the military you follow the last order given, and that's going to come from Hancock. If these two generals have a dispute over who controls the guns, it's not for a lieutenant to try to straighten it out. So as a result, all the batteries of the 2nd Corps continue to fire, and they start running out of long-range ammunition. Woodruff's battery in Ziegler's Grove will move further back into the woods for better protection. The two batteries on either side of Cushing, Arnold and Brown, have taken such heavy casualties and losses they're actually pulling out of line. Cushing's guns are going to have to stop firing because they're running out of long-range ammunition. The Confederates now notice a slackening in the Union fire, and they see what appear to be 18 guns being pulled off the ridgeline. So they believe they have finally done their job. That's when the word goes over to General Pickett that if he's going to advance, he has to do it now. And as we mentioned, even though it's called Pickett's charge, the man actually in command is James Longstreet. Longstreet never thought the attack had a chance to succeed, but Lee had given him no option. So when Pickett asked permission to move forward, all Longstreet can do is shake his head. He's also going to send word, though, to Pettigrew and Trimble to get ready to move. At roughly 3 o'clock in the afternoon then, in a line almost a mile long, will start to advance those 12,000 Confederate soldiers. And again, even though it's called Pickett's charge, those guys are not running across a mile of open field. when the temperature is 94 degrees. They are marching across in formation. And almost as soon as they leave the ridge line, the Union guns of McGillivray, south of the Pennsylvania Monument, and the Union batteries on Cemetery Hill, which are following Hunt's instructions, begin to open fire. And they start to affect the flanks of the attacking column. By that time, Cushing has had at least 9 limbers blown up during the attack. He's had at least three guns dismounted. Roughly half his horses are dead or badly injured back here on the hillside. He's got some casualties among his men. On July 2nd, he actually lost the services of Lieutenant Canby, who had been hit in the hand and had to go back to the rear for medical treatment. So he's down to one other officer. Cushing also, by that time, has taken a wound through both thighs. Now, Captain Cowan, with his New York battery, is going to be ordered up here to the Cemetery Ridge line. 5 of his guns go into position south of the clump of trees. But one gun missed the mark, came over on this side, and was crowding Cushing's left gun. So Cowan comes over to talk to Cushing about it. And Cowan didn't know that Cushing came limping over to him. They had been wounded by that time. And they start to discuss what's going to happen. And Cowan says at that point, Cushing makes the decision to move 2 of his guns down to the stone wall. Now, no one probably would have censored Cushing, considering all that's happening up here, if he had withdrawn his last 3 guns. But that's not what he's going to do. He's still got a lot of fight in him. And he's going to take 2 of his guns right down to the stone wall. Early in the day, Cushing received some volunteer help from the 71st Pennsylvania. And now some of those guys are taking the other remaining gun and pushing it right down into the angle itself. The report was they had that barrel loaded with anything they could find, even a couple of bayonets. And they angled it down towards Gettysburg Road. One of Cushing's sergeants came over and directed him how to aim it and how to properly fire it. Cushing, meanwhile, is taking 2 guns down to the forward wall and ordering his cannoneers to take all the canister ammunition down that they can fire. So we're going to follow Lieutenant Cushing down to his last position on the battlefield, see how he plans to stop the Confederate attack, and then what happens to Cushing and the battery after the battle is over. I had a question asked about where are the Confederate troops at this point. They're probably about 3/4, or let me put it this way, they're probably a quarter of the way across the field. Now, Pettigrew and Trimble's troops, if you look out in this direction towards the Virginia Monument, just to the right, you can see a fence going straight back towards Seminary Ridge. Okay? Pettigrew and Trimble's right flank is on that fence line. In fact, Fry's brigade of Pettigrew's division was the right flank brigade of the division. And he's going to be designated as the brigade of direction for the whole attack. So long as Fry keeps his right flank on that fence line, all he has to do is march straight across. Because where Pickett starts, and Fry being the brigade of direction, that's why Pickett has to do this maneuver in the field to link up with him. Okay? Also, at one point, Pettigrew and Trimble, where they're marching, have no cover whatsoever. It's a nice open field all the way across. Pickett's division will have the advantage of a little swell that protects them from the guns up here. It probably doesn't do much from the guns of McGillivry's line, but does cover them from up here. When Cushing brings his 2 guns down, he's going to place them right into the middle of Company I of the 69th Pennsylvania. The 69th Pennsylvania is the only regiment on the field to erect company markers. So we know exactly where Company I was, and it's right here. So Cushing is going to bring his 2 guns right in this general area. He probably doesn't have the wheels right up to the stone wall because he has to leave room in front for the 2 guys to load the piece. So the guns are probably on line back here someplace. And Company I has to get out of the way, because Cushing comes down here, starts to open canister, and at least 3 guys from Company I are going to have their heads blown off. They didn't get out in time at that point. But one soldier from the 69th is going to report that Cushings and Browns were almost completely silenced. The guns being dismounted, caissons exploding, battery wagons, forges, etc. swept away, shattered into splinters. Horses disemboweled, their flesh and entrails scattered, men beheaded, limbs torn, and bodies most horribly mangled into shapeless and unrecognizable masses of human flesh. Cushing, this whole time, is still being referred to as being cool and calm. And McDermott stated that Cushing stood with us during the fire and was directing the elevation of the guns. We could hear his voice calling to such a man to raise or lower so much. So Cushing is down here giving orders to his battery men. At a range of 400 yards, Cushing is going to start to fire single charges of canister at the Confederates. From here down to the Emmitsburg Road is about 300 yards, which means he's firing while the Confederates are still on the other side of the Emmitsburg Road. Ideally, when you fire canister, you want to fire in such a way that some of those iron balls will hit the ground and you get a ricochet effect. So I think Cushing is aiming towards the front part of the slope as those troops are coming out of the swell, and that's going to give them that ricochet effect. Dead troops in the rear. At this point, the only thing firing on the Confederates is the artillery, and that's it. The Union infantry has been told not to open fire until the Confederates get entangled in the fences along the Emmitsburg Road.
That's about where the musket's going to be effective.
Where, from the Bryan house and barn, the 2 white houses to the north of us, down to the Emmitsburg Road is about 170 yards. From here, it's roughly 300 yards. People have asked why the Confederates sent some guys out to take those fences down, or why didn't they aim their artillery to knock them down? Well, of course, with all the smoke, you're not going to see what's going on out there. Plus, just prior to the attack, the Union skirmish line is on the other side of the Emmitsburg Road. Plus, those fences on both sides of the road were very well built 5-rail post and rail fences. The local farmers would drive the livestock into town along the Emmitsburg Road. So in the days before a barbed wire, you had to have a wooden fence strong enough that the cows wouldn't knock down. And if the cows can't knock it down, the troops aren't going to do it. There was a regiment from New York and one from New Jersey out by the Tory Farm on July 2nd. And the Jersey guys reported they were ordered to take down the fences to make it easy for them to get back and forth. They said the fence was so well made, the only thing that worked was for 5 or 6 guys to go up to 1 rail at a time. All of them grabbed hold of the middle of it and pull back until the thing snapped. They said they got the top 2 rows out. The New York regiment got the top row out, but that was it. So those fences are still basically standing as the Confederates come up, which means they have to climb the fence on the west side of the road, get into the road, and then climb the fence on this side to make the final push up the slope. So these Union infantry is opening fire with the Confederates getting entangled in the fences, with the exception of the 69th Pennsylvania. Their colonel told them not to open fire until you see the whites of their eyes. The same range the Americans had on the British at Bunker Hill. And that's a range of between 25 and 30 yards. Now also the 69th has an advantage of the slashing in front of them, of the trees they cut down for a range of fire for Cushing's battery. So they got that protection as well. So the Confederates first has to get through that slashing and then hit the 69th. as they're doing it. At a range of 200 yards, Cushing would start to fire double and triple charges of canister. By that time, he's taken a wound in the right shoulder and another wound either in the abdomen or the testicles. Sergeant Fusion reported that in a letter to Cushing's sister, said he was hit in the abdomen. In a newspaper report, he said he was hit in the testicles. But someplace down there, Cushing takes a third wound. He's also going to lose his other officer. Lieutenant Muley is hit through both lungs and mortally wounded. The Confederates are still trying to advance up the slope towards Cushing's guns, and he's going to be able to get off one final round of canister at the oncoming Confederates. One Confederate officer said he was so close when that gun was fired, he actually felt the flame coming out of the muzzle of the gun. If you ever see these guns fired in slow motion, in that first hundredth of a second or whatever, you can see a flame actually coming out of the muzzle of the gun. But with that last blast of canister, Cushing is going to take his fourth and final wound. He is shot in the mouth and killed instantly, someplace where we're standing right now. At that point, the brigade of General Richard Garnett hits the stone wall, and they start to drive back Cushing's cannoneers and the right flank of the 69th back towards this copse of trees. But because that stone wall is the first protection Garnett's men have coming across the field, most of his men don't climb the wall. They stay on that side, the west side of the wall, waiting for the support of General Lewis Armistead's men to come up. Armistead would now lead roughly 300 men over the stone wall, place his hand on one of Cushing's guns, and then he's going to go down. He's hit in the right shoulder and the left thigh. The surge probably carried these guys a little bit further up the slope, but once they realized Armistead was down, most of those men come over to the other side of the wall. Now, under partial cover of the artillery, you have troops putting out here to the south to strike Pickett in the right flank. To the north of us, again under partial cover of the guns, more Union troops are putting out to hit the left flank of Pettigrew and Trimble. And more guns and troops are showing up on the ridge line right behind us. So eventually this attacking column is hit from three directions. With all that firepower directed against them and no support coming up, the Confederates here felt they had no choice but to break off the attack and head back where they started from. We estimate roughly 15 to 20 minutes to get across the field, no more than 15 minutes of the stone wall, and another 15-20 minutes to get it back across the field. So the whole attack is going to take a little less than an hour. And we've been at this program now for an hour and a half. So I've taken an hour and a half just to explain this part of the action. So you understand why it takes people years to study this whole thing. Once the battle is over, it's time to take stock on what's actually happened. Of the 5 batteries with the greatest total loss, 3 of them are coming from the 2nd Corps. As the 3 batteries right here in the middle, Cushing, Brown, and Arnold. All 5 batteries are in the top 10. And 4 of the 5 batteries suffer the greatest percentage loss of any batteries on the battlefield for the Union side. So the next time you read where somebody says the Confederate artillery fire was not effective on July 3rd, don't tell it to these guys. To them, this was very effective firepower. Officially, Cushing is credited with 126 officers and men. Of that number, 6 were killed and 32 wounded. That's a loss of 30%. Now, that's not as high as some infantry regiments who are suffering 50, 60, 70% losses. But this is a skilled position. You can't just take an infantryman, put him on a battery, and tell him you're now going to fire the guns. That's not going to work. So this is a skilled, well-trained position. So a 30% loss hampers the efficiency of the battery itself. So I mentioned Cushing's battery had the 2nd highest percentage loss, and the greatest total loss of any Union battery in all 3 days of the battle. He had roughly 65 horses killed or disabled. And according to the reports, they expended from June 1st to July 30th, 2,940 rounds of ammunition, most of it in these 2 days in July. It was always reported that not a sound wheel was left. 9 ammunition chests were blown up. The battery was in such bad shape, it was actually consolidated with Woodruff's battery to make a working battery. By the middle of July, they're going to be given 2 new 3-inch ordnance rifles and 2 12-pound Napoleon smoothbores and reassigned to the Cavalry Corps. They're served now with the Cavalry Corps through Grant's Overland Campaign until June 4th of 1864, when they're dismounted and put in the defenses of Washington, D.C. We talked about Lieutenant Cushing down here, 3 wounds, still firing his guns, refusing to leave until he takes this last shot. Now, most of the accounts I've read to you are kind of post-war accounts. But there were some contemporary accounts noting Cushing's actions. General Hunt, for example, said that Lieutenant Cushing and Woodruff belonged to a class of young officers who, although of the lowest commissioned rank, have gained distinguished Army reputation. The destruction of material was large. The enemy's cannonade cost us a great many horses and the explosion of an unusually large number of caissons and limbers. General Webb commanded the brigade in the angle itself. Noted in his report, Lieutenant A.H. Cushing, 4th U.S. Artillery, fell mortally wounded at the fence by the side of his guns. Cool, brave, competent, he fought for an hour and a half after having reported to me that he was wounded in both thighs. Colonel Norman Hall commanded the brigade right next to us. Also knows Cushing's actions over here. And he said Cushing challenged the admiration of all who saw him. 3 of his limbers were blown up and changed with the caisson limbers under fire. Several wheels were shot off his guns and replaced, till at last, severely wounded himself, his officers all killed or wounded, and with cannoneers enough to man a section. He pushed his gun to the fence in front and was killed while serving his last canister into the ranks of the advancing enemy. And Captain Hazard, the battalion commander, is going to report First Lieutenant A.H. Cushing fell on July 3rd, mortally wounded by musket shot. He especially distinguished himself for his extreme gallantry and bravery, his courage and ability, and his love for his profession. His untimely death and the loss of such a promise as this youth cherished are sincerely mourned. So even though some of the accounts of Cushing are post-war, even during the battle itself in the official reports, these senior officers notice Cushing, pay attention to him, see what he's doing, and report on it. If Cushing had survived the battle, he might have received a Medal of Honor for all these accolades he's getting. But the Army back then did not award the medal posthumously. And that's probably the main reason he didn't get it then. There was an effort started by citizens of Delafield, Wisconsin, almost 30 years ago to get Cushing the medal. And finally, about 3 years ago, the Secretary of the Army signed off on it. Congress finally approved this past December. The White House signed off on it. As I said, it's just a matter of time now to see when the White House will officially award Cushing the Medal of Honor. But I hope in this talk you've learned a little bit more about Cushing, why he deserves the medal, and give you a little bit more insight to what happened down here on the afternoon of July 3rd. I want to thank everybody for joining me this afternoon for the program. I'll be around to answer questions you have. But once again, I want to thank you for coming out with me today and for coming to Gettysburg. Thank you.